You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody.
Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Hi guys, and welcome back once more to Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis, where we introduce you to guests you may never have heard of, yet who have a connection to hiking, and normally the Appalachian Trail, that is so visceral and so real that their stories are compelling and worth listening to. Those of us, all of us who've touched the trail, have been left with a lifetime of memories and feelings that we've rarely been able to replicate back in our real lives. This show attempts to share those stories and allows non-hikers to listen along with our guests as they remember that day, that moment, when life stood still for them. For many of us, we've never been the same. Today's main guest, Brant Bazner, has another of those stories. Brant and I have done about the same mileage on the AT, yet while I've done the complete trail twice, Brant has spread his miles over many years in long sections, several of those miles with his beloved dog Garvey. Brant and Garvey will be along soon. Another new name is Chloe Decamera. I'm sure that many of you will have heard of the Leave No Trace principles and probably know pretty much what that means. I reached out to the Appalachian Trail Conservancy recently and asked them for somebody to come on the show who really knows about Leave No Trace. Chloe got the short straw, yet she is so good at educating us on how we should all behave when we're out in the woods. Chloe will be on after Brant. Finally, and it really is finally, Paul Stutzman's journey on the AT has come to its conclusion. I've been lucky enough to have met Paul a few times recently, and he really is a nice bloke, very much as he comes across in his great book. I'll be interviewing Paul soon for the show, and as I told him yesterday, the reading of this book has been the most popular one I've ever read on the show. I just hope that you enjoy our next book, Grandma Gatewood's Walk by Ben Montgomery, as much as you seem to have enjoyed this one. So now, Brant Bazner. Larry Riddle, who many of you know as Crazy Larry in Damascus, wrote to me about Brant and told me that he thought Brant would be an excellent guest. Larry was right. Here's Brant. I got an email recently from Crazy Larry himself, Larry Riddle in Damascus, and Larry suggested that one of his buddies, Brant Bazner, would be a good person to interview for the show. So let's meet Brant. Hi, Brant. How are you?
I'm great. How are you, Steve?
I'm good, thank you. And you're a hiker, and I know that you don't like really to hike by yourself. Who's Garvey?
Garvey is my canine companion. He is a 12-year-old golden doodle. A golden doodle. Which, for those unfamiliar, he is half standard poodle and half golden retriever.
Oh, right. Well, that's pretty complicated.
So, two excellent breeds for hiking, which I had no idea when I got him as a puppy. Just kind of sort of turned out that way.
Oh, really? So how does a hiker...
I adopted him.
How does a dog owner... this is actually a question I was going to ask you later, but now you've mentioned it. How does anybody know that a dog is good for hiking, and how do they know whether the dog's actually enjoying themselves?
Well, there's a lot of things, actually. I would say the number one thing to consider before bringing a dog on the trail is whether or not your dog is socialized.
All right.
That would be number one, because especially on the Appalachian Trail, it's a very social place. I mean, at any given moment, there could be dozens of people around you.
Sure.
There could be other dogs around you. So the more that you add to the numbers, the more potential there is for conflict. So you get two unsocialized dogs, you get them jumping on people's gear, causing all kinds of havoc. That would be number one.
Uh-huh.
If your dog's not well-trained and not socialized, I wouldn't even consider bringing it on a long-distance hike.
Right. It's funny, actually, and I ask because my listeners know that I was bitten by a dog on the AT in 2014, and they do kind of frighten me a bit now. It puts you off, really. and I know that virtually everybody I met, I always ask them, is your dog enjoying it? Oh, they love it. I've never met a single person who hikes with a dog who isn't convinced that their dog loves it. But yeah, I've seen several dogs on the trail who clearly were not enjoying themselves. And that's a real difficult thing. Actually, funny, I'm looking at your videos. I'm looking at some of your videos today. Yeah, your dog clearly does enjoy being there, so that's great. But you know what I mean, don't you? Everybody seems to think they know how to handle a dog on the trail, don't they?
Well, yeah, that can be the case a lot of the time. Nobody wants to admit that their dog's a problem because they love their dog like they love their children.
Yeah, sure.
Hopefully, anyway.
Often more.
Sometimes, yeah. In my case, I don't have any children, so Garvey is my child.
Oh, right. So yeah. So you hike with Garvey. We may come back to dogs in a minute, but you are quite an experienced hiker. When we spoke, you told me you've done about 5,000 miles of hiking, and even though you don't do through hikes, you do kind of long sections, don't you? What sort of sections do you normally put together?
Well, as far as the AT goes, generally about 500 miles is where I like to keep it.
Right.
Now, hiking with Garvey, he's 12 years old now.
Yeah.
So 2 years ago, we through hiked Virginia from Harpers Ferry to here.
Nice.
He was fine. I mean, he was eager to do big miles, and a lot of times he was hiking more than I would.
Huh.
But now, last year, we cut it down a little bit, down to 300 miles. We did Pennsylvania, and actually, he did have a couple moments there where he wasn't feeling well, and I thought I was going to have to get off the trail.
Sure.
And we kind of just sat in place and kind of waited for him to get better. He got a haircut. Long story short, we got back on trail and finished. However, I can't see bringing him out on a longer hike each year. I'm going to have to reduce the miles and just see what happens with him at his age. If he shows any kind of signs of fatigue or not being able to handle it, we're going home. I mean, that would be a second thing I would say. If you're not willing to hike your dog's hike,
yes,
then you have no business bringing your dog along, because when you bring your dog, it becomes your dog's hike, not yours. Everything is going to revolve around your dog.
And I can see from your videos, that's exactly what you do. And it's clear from looking at some of your videos today that you very much do that. And the fact that you articulate it in that way, you're hiking your dog's hike, he's not hiking yours, is he?
No, not at all. And, I'll be the first to admit I'm not a perfect dog owner either, but I learn as I go along, and I try to have respect for other people. I think a lot of what you see on the longer trails when people discontinue allowing dogs, it's the same with having unruly hikers. You have too many incidents over and over, and then it ruins it for the next person or dog who comes along. So
yeah, and you don't often stay at shelters, do you?
No, not usually. I mean, I've been known to. Sure, I've spent a lot of time in shelters, and Garvey has spent a fair amount of time in shelters as well. However, we don't just assume that he can come into the shelter.
Right.
There are circumstances where I'll stay, and there are circumstances where I won't. And it generally...
Is another dog a factor in that?
Sometimes it can be. When dogs are unruly on the trail, as you probably well know, news of that travels fast.
Yes.
Ahead of the dogs of the people. So when you hear something like that, people will warn me. They'll be like, hey, there's a couple crazy unleashed dogs up ahead. So, keep a close eye on your dog. When I hear that type of thing, I tend to react accordingly, and I may decide to camp away from an area where I know there are problem dogs.
Right. So you, as I said, you told me you've done about 5,000 hiking miles in total. Is most of that on the AT?
Well, that's what I'm estimating on the AT, and that's probably, I've probably done more than that if you count all of the hiking I've done in the last 20 years around Damascus and in the Mount Rogers, Grayson Highlands area. You
tend to stay in that sort of area, do you?
No. I've been trying to do big chunks pretty much every year. Right. But if I can't get out, I will hike in the area here. For instance, I've done Damascus to Hot Springs 4 times because it's close by. It's an easy hike. I love it.
Yeah.
I know what to expect.
Yeah, I think it's a really lovely section. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites too. So
yeah, beautiful. So when did you start? You say you've been doing it for about 20 odd years. So did you not do it as a youngster, or something you took up as you got older?
I hiked in other places when I was younger. I mean, I think the first time I remember hearing about the AT was in Harpers Ferry. Went on a family trip when I was in my early teens, 12 or something like that, 13 years old. And I saw the sign there about the trail going from Maine to Georgia and just kind of filed it away in the back of my head, thinking, oh, that would be cool to do that someday. And not knowing anything about the logistics of it or anything. And then I was actually hiking on the AT in the Standing Indian area.
Uh-huh.
And I was living in Atlanta at the time. I used to go up to hike North Georgia, Standing Indian Loop, that whole area up there I love.
Right.
I would go up there a lot. And I was up there with a friend, and he was asking me about the AT. And I didn't know too much about it other than it went from Georgia to Maine. And we had passed a few people that said, hey, we're going the whole way.
Yes.
And I just didn't realize that people did that. I mean, I knew that it had been done, but I didn't really know that there was a whole subculture attached to it.
Yes.
And back then it kind of was. The AT community was kind of an unknown thing. That was right around the time A Walk in the Woods, the book, had just come out.
Yeah.
So not a lot of people were real familiar with Bill Bryson yet. He was still, a new AT author, so to speak.
Sure.
And, the internet hadn't come around yet. So we would go to an outfitter like REI or someplace like that, to the book section, and find a book on the AT. And I discovered that there was this whole community of people, and that there was, places that it went through towns. I had no idea that the AT went through towns. I thought it was just, this wooded path.
Yeah. And you spent quite a lot of time out there. Have you ever wondered, because obviously when we're on the trail, we have a lot of time to think. Do you ever wonder what it is about the trail, and the AT in particular, that garners such lavish praise? It sometimes almost feels spiritual, doesn't it?
Well, it does. And again, I think that goes, at least in my opinion, that goes back to the community of people. It's almost, I've heard the AT compared to being a summer camp for adults. And I guess that's kind of how it feels in some ways. You go there kind of nervous and not knowing what to expect, and then you kind of meet people along the way. You form relationships, and some of those relationships last for the rest of your life.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, there's in life, people come and people go. You have different jobs that you might work at, or different places that you might live, and you come in contact with people and then they're gone. But it seems like with this trail community, hiking the AT is such a profound thing to so many people that when you come home, nobody understands it.
That's right.
And I think a lot of people will, even after going out for a month, will come home and suffer some kind of post-trail depression.
Sure.
And until you've experienced it yourself, you just don't know what it is. You go home and you've had this amazing experience, and you have these great stories. And when you start to tell them, you can tell that nobody's listening to you. So as a result, you revert back to the trail community for those years.
Yeah. Well, I told people when I was on the trail, because this was my second through hike in 2019, I said, people are going to really want to hear all your stories when you get back home for about 3 weeks. Then they're going to want you to shut up, because their eyes just glaze over. They don't see it. And the best example I had of that was one of our guests on the show, Kelly Anderson. She's only a youngster in her early 30s. She came down to visit me and my wife, and we had lunch and so on. And afterwards, my wife said, I think I'm going to leave now. She said later, I had no idea what you were talking about. The two of you were just so locked into each other because we had something to talk about, that we both shared that thing. And I think that's what it is about the trail. It's this shared experience that unless you get out there, you can't really feel it, can you?
No. And thank God I've never been in a war, but I kind of think like that's why you have VFW halls and things like that, because unless you've been through some kind of a profound experience,
sure,
nobody else is going to understand what you've been through. And you want to be around people who know what you've been through and who understand what's going on in your head, because coming off a long distance hike, that can ruin a person. I mean, it can change a person for life. I mean, right down to the possessions that you own, to what you think is important, to who you hang around with.
Yes.
And, not everybody has that profound of an experience, but
I think most people
do.
Yeah, I think I would still say the majority probably do. I know that when my father and my brother were both police, and the reason police talk to each other It's because they know what they see. And my brother says, I've seen things nobody should ever see. And the only way in which they can talk that out is talking to other people who understand it. Now, so you've been in Damascus for some time now and understand that you work in an outfitters in town. Did you move there for its proximity to the trail? Did the trail attract you that much, or you just fancy going to Damascus?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's definitely the reason. I'd come here. Actually, I started my first long-distance hike here.
All right.
In 1997. Right. That was the same year. I started this story earlier. I was hiking by Standing Indian Mountain with a friend. He was asking me about the trail. Yeah. And he was asking all these questions. And then when he was done, I kind of remarked, I said, I'm going to hike it someday. And then, I had that moment that some people have where that someday. It's just like, what does someday mean? And all these question marks are floating. It's just like a cartoon. And I'm thinking, well, if I don't define someday or put a date on it or start it, it's never going to happen. And the timing's never going to be perfect. If I wait till I retire, I could walk outside and get hit by a bus tomorrow.
Of course.
So I started researching the trail right away. I found out it was too late for me to start a northbound hike. So rather than wait till the following spring, I jumped up here to Damascus, September 15th of 1997, started walking south towards Springer.
Right. And did you go all the way? Go all the way to Springer?
I did. I did miss a little bit of a section, but I did come back and get that before trail days. So I did it in its entirety.
Yeah.
So I was hooked after that. And after the first time, I just missed the trail. So fast forward, I started coming back for trail days, and I'd met some people here in Damascus during trail days. And I think I came back for my third trail days, and I was living in Atlanta at the time,
right,
and really just kind of spinning my wheels. I'd get up to North Georgia when I could, but it was just work. I was working for a custom home builder as a site superintendent, so I was in my truck all day long, driving from site to site to site, solving people's problems. And by the time I got home, I didn't want to leave the house. I didn't want to go out in traffic or drive or be in a truck.
Jeez.
Came here for trail days, and another friend who was from Atlanta said, "Are you still in Atlanta?" I said, "Yep." And he's like, "You got to get out of there." It was that simple. I went back, cut all ties, sold a bunch of stuff, and made a few contacts here and came here, I think a month and a half or 2 months later.
Wow. What's it like there in winter? Is it nice?
Well, I like it. It's as good of a place as any to be in winter. It's mild. There's not a lot going on here as far as tourism.
Yeah, I'm sure. And you actually do like some cold weather hiking, as you did mention when we spoke the other day. You quite liked cold weather hiking as well, don't you?
I wouldn't say that I like it.
Oh, right.
When I was younger, I did. I kind of more tolerate it now that I'm older. I don't know if you had a chance to poke into any of the Virginia hike we did two years ago in March.
I didn't. I haven't looked at that video. I'm going to talk about your videos in a minute, actually. But no, I didn't. Tell me about that.
We've gone through 4 snowstorms on that trip between Harper's Ferry and here.
Oh, my gosh.
And there's a video where Garvey just looks like a meerkat jumping in and out of prairie dog holes. He's just going in footprints before us. And there were some other crazy adventures on that trip. I ended up pitching my tarp right next to the women's bathroom at the Humpback Rocks picnic area because we were in a blizzard.
Nice.
And it turned into wet snow, and it was starting to get dark, and it was windy. And it was like a borderline survival situation almost.
Jeez.
And seeing that privy was probably one of the greatest sights that I've ever seen in my life.
That gives you context for your life, doesn't it? It gives you some perspective rather on your life, doesn't it? When you see a woman's privy,
absolutely.
And that can save
having those 2 walls to block the wind was the greatest thing I could have possibly asked for on that night.
Yeah.
And that's what I call trail magic.
Yeah, well, I'm going to come back to that in a minute, actually, trail magic. Now, I watched a couple of your videos, and you've got a really relaxed vibe in your delivery. And funny enough, I was kind of surprised. I was looking at it, and I remember talking to you the other night. You seem to be quite a reserved kind of guy. What got you interested in sharing that part of your life by starting a YouTube channel?
Well, I think a lot of it had to do with documenting it for myself.
Right.
So I can look back years later. I've always enjoyed video. And probably 20 years ago, if there would have been a camera that I didn't have to hoist on top of my shoulder that weighed more than my pack, I probably would have been making videos back then.
All right. Interesting.
So now that I have the capability to do that on a phone, I do it for my own amusement more than anything.
All right. Well,
for my own.
I found the ones that I saw interesting. And one of them it made me laugh, actually. It was called The Dumbest Thing I've Done So Far on Trail. And apparently you lose things on trips. Is that a regular thing? Because you actually lost some tent poles,
yeah,
didn't you?
that was this past summer. I left my tent poles at Stealth Campsite at Pine Grove Furnace.
Yeah.
I guess it's karma for stealth camping where I'm not supposed to, but I wasn't harming anything. I was leaving no trace. No one knew I was there.
Yeah.
But I do leave things behind quite frequently, and I've stated before in my videos that if you ever want to outfit yourself for a hike, just follow me, and eventually you'll have all the gear you need.
Oh my gosh, that's not good, is it? That's funny. And funny enough, you also mentioned, you say you live in Damascus, do you? Do you have a house or apartment or something?
I do. I'm in a house, and I'm very fortunate to be able to look out my back window and see the Creeper Trail / AT.
Oh, beautiful. Lovely. Well, the reason I ask, because in one of the other videos, you also referred to a stealth site that you use just outside Damascus. I'm not asking you to say where it is, but do you sometimes just go into the woods of a night and just stay there?
I do it a lot, actually. That's kind of my office up there. If I'm doing any kind of a gear review video or something of that nature, I prefer to be outside. Nice. Rather than having a bookcase behind me or something.
Yeah, and that's probably perfect for Garvey as well, isn't it? Because he doesn't have to go too far sometimes.
Oh yeah, and he gets to go outside, and he just loves to be outside. He always has.
Yeah,
he's always liked to hike. He's always been very energetic. Still loves to chase the ball at his age.
Is it? Because I think
it's good for him.
Because I think it was a hot period of time, and you were trying to find shaded spots for you and Garvey to stay. So are you a gear guy? I mean, you work in an outfitters. Do you advise hikers on what to get?
Oh, all the time. That's pretty much mostly what my job entails, other than just coordinating shuttles on the Virginia Creeper Trail.
Right. Well, that's why I asked the question, really. So could you share a few pointers for listeners? Because if you're actually a gear guy, I'm not saying necessarily mention the names of different things, but if somebody's looking to get kitted out and wants to keep the weight down, what do you advise people to get?
Well, I am a gear guy. I'll be the first to admit that. I mean, I do work at an outfitter. I've probably got 4 different sleeping bags currently and several packs. And yeah, I've got a ton of gear. I'll tell the exact same thing to people who walk through the door, and I'm generalizing here. Of course, you do need certain types of gear, but the most important piece of gear is what you're carrying in your head.
Yeah, you can't buy that though, can you?
Well, sometimes, I understand the nuts and bolts of it. And, I do pack shakedowns for people all the time.
All right.
That's part of what we do there. And gear is such a personalized thing, in my opinion. I feel that if you look at everyone's kit, everybody is going to have something completely different than the next person.
Of course.
You may have similarities or gear that might be more popular than other pieces of gear, but it's kind of like clothing. Most people are going to choose what reflects them and their personal needs. So that being said, it really depends on what somebody's looking for or what they're trying to do before I can give them advice. Yeah,
I guess. If you say someone's trying to do, say, a 500-mile hike or even a through hike, are there any real basics you should really concentrate on?
If you're trying to get your weight down, the big 3 is the easiest way to do that.
Yeah.
You can cut the handle off your toothbrush and saw the borders off your maps or whatever you want to do, and that's going to save maybe a half an ounce.
Yes, tops.
All said and done.
Yeah.
If you're lucky. So your 3 heaviest items, it only makes sense that if you can reduce the weight of those, then you're reducing the weight of the entirety of your pack.
And that is a massive change in the last couple of years, isn't it? Because when I went in 2014, my pack alone, empty, was 5.5 pounds. The one I used this year was 19 ounces. That immediately is a massive difference, isn't it?
And that would have been considered reasonable, say, 20 years ago. a 4-pound pack or 5-pound pack was considered fairly light at the time across the board.
Are all the companies going to lighter weight as far as you can see?
I think they have to, more or less now. The UL thing kind of got its start right around 20 years ago, the late 90s, early 2000s. You started seeing people, but it wasn't as widespread of a movement as it is now.
And it's distinctly, there's no question about it. It's just distinctly easier to hike when you've got less weight on your pack, almost by definition, isn't it?
Well, absolutely. It's, the heavier your pack is, the more calories you're going to have to burn to get up the hill.
Sure.
And the more calories you have to burn, the heavier your food's going to be. So it only makes sense. And you don't have to hike fast, but it only makes sense to start with a lighter pack.
Yeah.
I see people slack pack a lot, and I've got nothing against slack packing. I've slack packed before.
Damn right.
But I don't think that it's a good idea to start off doing that, say in Georgia, if you're trying to hike the AT.
No, nor do I.
You get really complacent or used to not having the weight on your back. And then all of a sudden, bam, you're in the Smokies. You've got a 7-mile climb straight up. And
I remember it well.
There's no slack packing through there.
Yeah. So if you were buying brand new gear now, do you think there's a tipping point beyond which they can't reduce it anymore? It'll start getting, the risk reward will be more and more dangerous effectively.
I think that the big changes in the last few years, at least the last 20 years, have been materials.
Right.
And that's what's allowed the gear to be lighter and stronger.
Sure.
First, you had sil nylon that came out, right around 20 years ago, and that was great. Everyone started ditching their Cordura, switching over to sil nylon, kind of like people are doing with DCF now, currently. So, and that's enabled people to get much lighter too. I mean, you've got people out there that have like 6-pound base weight.
I just don't know how they do that at all. Just don't get it.
That's insane. I mean, some of the packs in the 90s weighed like 6 to 8 pounds empty.
It's amazing, isn't it? Absolutely amazing. Actually, one of the things that, interestingly, now you are a gear guy, which I didn't realise before, and I knew you worked in an outfitter, so I thought there was a good chance you would be. I could not work out this past year how to cope with rain. What do you do? I mean, how do you keep rain off as best you can?
To be quite honest with you, if you can come up with a solution to that, you could probably retire and be independently wealthy for the rest of your life.
I've done one of those. I retired. I'm not independently wealthy now, unfortunately.
Okay, well, you're off to a good start then.
Yeah. So what do you do then? So what do you do in rain, for example?
Well, it depends on the season.
Okay, yeah.
If it's winter, rain jacket for me, started using an umbrella. Because you're familiar with Hawk, of course, what he says.
Yeah.
It's the difference between being wet and being completely soaked.
Yes.
And it makes perfect sense, especially if you're vlogging your thru hike and you've got to pull the camera out and it's pouring rain. An umbrella allows you to do that.
Sure.
In the summer, that might be the only rain gear I might carry. Usually I'll always carry some kind of a raincoat just as a windbreak, if nothing else.
Yeah, that's what I had.
To trap my heat in so I don't become hypothermic. But
I must be hot-blooded or something, because I find as soon as I put a rain jacket on, however cold it is outside, I'm sweating terribly because I'm always going uphill and stuff. So it's almost impossible. But you're right. If you can work out how to do that, then you've really cracked the code, haven't you, really? I
always say waterproof is a scam marketing term that was made up by outdoor companies.
I totally agree, yeah. I reckon waterproof...
There's really no such thing.
Yeah, waterproof is at best 20 minutes as far as I can see. Then after that, you're in all sorts of trouble. So, having been a hiker for an extended period of time, have you observed changes in the trail? Because you see quite a bit of the same trail all the time. Is the trail pretty much as it was 20 years ago, as far as you can see?
No, it's a lot different.
In what way?
A lot different. Well, as far as the physical trail itself, there have been a lot of changes to it. It's in much better condition. Using from Damascus south down to Hot Springs as an example, most of that trail, say back in the time of, the 1940s, 1950s, most of that had been logged.
Right.
And the trail would go over pretty much balds.
Right.
And it would go straight over the top of them, kind of like you're familiar, of course, you thru hiked twice, the Roan Highlands.
Yeah, love it there.
So a lot of the trail back then, before they started allowing this regrowth, was very similar. So as a result, you just go straight up, straight down, no switchbacks.
Right.
Well, now that the trail or the forest is reforested, you go to the top of these summits. Some of them are like big bald, little bald, and there's trees everywhere.
Yeah,
it's
beautiful.
not a bald anymore. So the trail has been routed around the climb at the same elevation contour.
And that explains a lot of the extension of the mileage, I presume, doesn't it?
Well, it does. And the mileage is constantly fluctuating. I guess they come up with an official amount of miles each year, but it can't possibly stay the same because there are always trail clubs out there rerouting things.
Yeah.
So it's never, and even the halfway point might fluctuate during the year. So
Oh, it does, definitely.
So the mileage is symbolic, but yeah, it does. Every time they reroute, it will change things. And sometimes they try and keep the mileage approximately the same. Like you might travel slightly the same distance, but instead of going over the top of the mountain, you just kind of go around it.
Yeah, but it's gone up. It's gone up 7 miles, about 7 miles since I hiked it 5 years before. So that really is quite a. 7 miles is quite a bit of difference, really. In the early days, it was a day's hiking. So, it did make quite a bit of change. Yeah. So, what about that's changes in the trail? What about changes in hikers from your observations?
Well, I still think that the hiking community is one of the greatest communities I've ever been involved in personally.
Cool.
There's a lot more people now because the trail is a lot more popular.
Yeah,
so that's another change.
Yeah.
Back in the day, a lot of people didn't know about the AT.
Sure.
You weren't as likely to get rides hitchhiking, or sometimes you would get a ride from somebody and they had no idea what the AT was.
Yes. I still found that last year. I still found that last year. Amazingly.
Did you really?
Oh, yes, I did. Incredibly, yeah. Really? There's a long footpath. Some people lived really close to the trail and just had no idea what it was. It was amazing to me.
No clue. It is amazing.
None whatever. So, yeah, I'm glad you said that hikers are much the same because hikers, because of Facebook, I think, tend to have got a bad rap over the years. And my personal experience of the hiking community has always been positive. I've rarely had any negative vibes from anybody at all. So, I'm really pleased to hear you feel that as well. And do you have any plans, maybe a few years down the line, to ever do an end-to-end through hike of the AT?
I thought about it. I mean, I actually started off to do that. That was my original idea.
Yeah.
And as I said, I wasn't going to have time to do a whole through hike. So I did the section hike from here down to Springer.
Yeah.
And then I met a through hiker who I'm friends with to this day. He was a southbounder. Mm-hmm. He was kind of, he was burned out by the time that I met him.
Sure.
And he's like, you are doing this the right way. He's like, if I could do it over again, he's like, I would just do it in sections. He's like, I'm so sick of hiking right now. It's just not even fun anymore. But I started off to do it and I'm going to finish. So he ended up enjoying his hike. I mean, we had an outstanding time, the two of us hiking south from here.
It's tough
and
not to.
It really kind of saved his hike, I think.
Yeah.
In the end, and he kind of pointed me in the right direction. I started rethinking on whether I wanted to through hike or not.
Right.
So next year, I went from Harper's Ferry down to here,
right,
and just kind of kept section hiking until I completed the trail. Funny story though, I moved here and probably completed the southern half of the trail like 4 times before I ever finished the trail one time.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I that's a whole other story for another campfire, but I ended up not hiking for about 9 years, not long distance, and just hiking around here. Sure. And I had one section from Killington up to Gorham to complete. So I kind of saved the whites for last.
That's dangerous.
I completed that hike in 2011.
Right.
And I'm a serial section hiker. I've just about got the trail finished twice. And like I said, from here down to the southern portion, I don't even keep count anymore.
No need to.
Yes, at some point I would probably like to through hike. Unfortunately, at Garvey's age right now,
that's a
there's
shame.
no way for him to through hike. I wouldn't put him through that. There's just absolutely no way. And while I have him around, I'm just going to hike what he wants to hike. that's going to dictate everything I do in the future.
Take him up to your stealth site and do all the filming up there with him.
Absolutely, yeah. So I do go up there a lot. Yeah, that's a cool place, and that's kind of where I go to hang out because it's close by. And
Sure.
I'm fortunate that I'm in a trail town and I can just pop out and be on the AT and be to a campsite in half an hour.
I agree. That's what makes that existence so attractive. I'm sure it must be beautiful to live there. Well, look, I'm so glad that Larry reached out and you shared your story with us. You and I have done about the same distance in hiking, but I've only done it in a couple of lumps, two big lumps. But it's been wonderful to share thoughts and memories with you, and I really appreciate you coming on and talking to us.
Oh, no problem, Steve. I could go on for hours anytime. If you want to talk about hiking, give me a call. We'll talk for the next 10 hours.
I appreciate it. Well, thanks so much. Take it easy. And when I get
Thanks
to
for having me
Damascus,
on.
when I get to Damascus for Trail Days, we must have a beer.
Absolutely.
Okay, take it easy. Bye.
You too, Steve. Thanks.
Bye. What a gentle, quiet soul Brant is, and so knowledgeable about the trail and hiking in general. I highly recommend his YouTube channel. It's always interesting and contains great little nuggets that you can take to the trail yourself. Once again, I want to thank those of you who've stepped up and donated to my shows through the donate button on the podcast page of my website, mightyblueontheat.com. I'll soon have a few more donate buttons on that side, as well as on the hikingradionetwork.com website, where you can catch each and every show on our network of hiking shows. And if you don't fancy donating, why not buy one of the Hiking Radio Network shirts from our new cool merch shop on the hikingradionetwork.com site. Check it out. So now it's Chloe Decamera. Leave no trace is such an important part of hiking these long-distance trails these days. So I invited Chloe along from the Appalachian Trail Conservancy to make sure that we all have the concepts in our minds as we hit our trails, wherever they may be. Here's Chloe. I'd like to introduce you to a young lady called Chloe Decamera from the ATC. And we've only just met online, and she told me all sorts of things as she is. So she's definitely speaking with some authority. So hi, Chloe. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing just fine, Steve. And yourself?
I'm pretty good, thanks. And I'm very pleased that you're on, because I spoke to the ATC to ask if they could put me in touch with somebody who could speak with some authority over leave no trace principles. And with the season coming up, this is a really important time, obviously, that people understand the concept. So tell us firstly your background.
Well, I took the conventional approach to public lands, and I majored in French at university. So that's a complete joke. But I also majored in religious studies, which I wrote a thesis on through hiking the Appalachian Trail as a form of religious experience.
Wow.
And that was what originally got me hooked on the Appalachian Trail and the hiking experience. So quickly after I graduated, I became a volunteer for the Appalachian Trail Conservancy in their Asheville, North Carolina office. And that led to some seasonal work in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. And then I attempted a thru hike in 2015 and walked for 142 days before I summited Katahdin in Maine. So like most people say, it's a life-changing experience. No matter if it's a weekend or a 6-month journey on the Appalachian Trail, it can really just change your life for the better and prove the goodness of humanity. And I was hooked. And once I wrapped up, I continued volunteering with the ATC, which led to a full-time job in 2015 towards the end of the year as a trail education specialist. I spent 3 seasons in the Smokies as a ridge runner, which is like a backcountry ranger, but rather than wearing a badge and having enforcement, you're wearing a patch and you're first and foremost an educator in the AT.
Nice.
So that led me to have thousands of contacts over the years with hikers, having that same epic journey that I had just a few years prior, and encouraging them to know the bigger picture of what's going on the Appalachian Trail with how many users are out there, but also practice leave no trace. That was a huge part of my job.
Well, that's really what I want to come to, because what's important here, I don't want anybody listening here to think that this is someone we've plucked off the street just to talk to us about leave no trace, a random hiker. Chloe knows her stuff. She's an education specialist about leave no trace. So now we've established your bona fides about leave no trace. Could you tell? Do you notice I said bona fides? Not French, but it's another language. So, can you tell listeners the general principles behind leave no trace? Because I think we all think we know it, but we probably don't, do we?
You know, at the end of the day, I think it's common knowledge. One of my favorite practices to do with a new group of hikers is to list a number 1 through 7 and say, come up with the principles yourself. And usually what I see is that people generally know how to minimize their impact on a trail. It's packing out your trash. It's leaving things as you find it. Don't burn the forest down or something along those lines. But the official wording and principles from the Center of Leave No Trace, the nonprofit based out of Boulder, Colorado, there are 7 principles, and I'll list them off really quickly.
Sure.
But I don't want us to get too caught up in the official verbiage. It's plan ahead and prepare. Travel and camp on durable surfaces. I'm actually going to do these little hand gestures I have to help me remember. Dispose of waste properly. 4 is leave what you find. 5 is minimize campfire impacts. 6 is respect wildlife. And 7 is be considerate to other visitors.
That would have been so much better in video, because I could see you did, especially the wildlife thing. That was pretty good. Yeah.
Yep.
Making the rabbit ears or whatever it was you just did. That was cool. So talk me through that. So why is that so important, and why are they the principles, or is this just a general distillation of common sense?
I think it's a little bit of both, but Leave No Trace is steeped in science and research. So throughout the past 40 years, researchers and public land managers, whether it be a national forest, national park, Bureau of Land Management, et cetera, have seen the rise of use in public lands, and they've wanted to come up with a way to distill all of the major issues they were seeing of, wildlife being affected from people feeding
Sure.
Chipmunks to a lot of stumps being found at really heavily used campsites from people hacking at them with hatchets and whatnot. Yeah. So they're seeing these issues and they're saying, well, how can we be preventative about it? And so they've done a lot of research with Jeff Marion kind of leading the charge, and he's a recreation ecologist based out of Virginia Tech, and he is literally the man that wrote the book on Leave No Trace.
Oh, really? Oh.
Yes.
I love that. I love that when you quote somebody who literally wrote the book about Leave No Trace. Yeah.
So they distilled it down into 7 principles that are palatable for people to see and understand. And what I see a lot from hikers that are new to the Appalachian Trail or just new to hiking in general is that they already know these. They might not know the word for word, principle by principle, but they typically know how to pack out their own trash. They might need a little assistance on, well, how far do I actually dig a cat hole to defecate, or how far do I need to walk away from a water source when I go to the bathroom, or what is the best way to find a campsite. So that's where we have professionals that are out there on the Appalachian Trail that are there to educate hikers and to give them a little bit more of that detailed information. So I would say by and far people know this.
So as a ridge runner, you obviously saw stuff firsthand, and people probably behave better around ridge runners than they do when other people aren't around. But as a thru hiker yourself, you must have seen good and bad practice. What's the worst thing that people do, and which is the biggest violation of the rules you generally see?
Yeah. So just to clarify, as a ridge runner, I'm not perfect, nor was I perfect. And as a thru hiker, good gosh, I definitely made some mistakes. I do like to share those with the public, just to say that none of us are born these Buddhas that levitate above the ground and never leave a footprint, or just knowing all the principles by heart. So it's a learned skill, and you have to look into it. So when I was a thru hiker myself, I was really scared and intimidated by the skill of throwing a food line over a branch and hoisting my food bag up every night. And I was so intimidated by it because I didn't grow up with a backpacking experience or have a family that ever went camping. So I was exposed to it through volunteering, but I didn't hone in those skills before I started my hike. Sure. So what I started to do was just sleep with my food. And I slept with my food every single night of my hike. Wow. And I always thought to myself, the power of numbers, no one can get me. And Steve, the worst thing that ever happened to me was that nothing ever happened to me. And so by the time I finished my hike, it just solidified this mindset of, oh, the ATC, like, that's just a man trying to bring you down. Like, they don't know what the real hiking experience is like. Clearly, like, these are just like rules that like want to like make my trip feel more regimented and not like this free, liberating experience. And it wasn't until I was a ridge runner, pardon me, that I started walking against the bubble. I was walking southbound as most of the bubble was walking northbound.
Sure.
And you're walking a lower mileage every day because you're going from shelter to shelter.
Mm-hmm.
So I would have some days where I was hiking no more than 5 miles. And I would walk this section repeatedly for 3 months. And I would see that these sites, while the thru hikers would come through and continue north, forget about any site they had stayed at the night before, there was another group that came the next night and another group that came the following night. So I saw these sites remain stationary, and I saw the wildlife around them become more and more acclimated. And just because we maybe slept with our food one night, or we decided to leave trash or spit our toothpaste into a fire pit, it might have not affected us in the moment, but it's certainly affecting those that come after us. And I've had some very negative experiences with wildlife, especially when they no longer become wild, they become acclimated, and then that acclimation turns into territorial behavior, and that can become aggressive behavior.
So really, that main principle you're talking about there is really how it does affect wildlife more than anything else. The way what you're saying there, and I certainly, we saw somewhere, I think we were either New Hampshire or Maine, where a bear had to be taken away and put down because it had become so acclimated. It eventually took a pack of the hikers back. Because they were firstly they were feeding it, and then they were chucking rocks at it. This poor bear, and it died, and that sort of thing is so sad. So, is there a way to distill the principles down? I'm going to put a link in the show notes to something. I'm not sure what it's going to be yet, but you're going to send me hopefully something with.
I have plenty of links for you.
I'm sure you do. Can you distill down to just a few words to something that hikers can take away as they prepare for this upcoming hiking season?
There are a really great set of videos out there, and they're called the "Don't Be That Guy" videos.
That's the word. That's the expression.
There we go.
Don't be that guy.
Don't be that guy that is only thinking about your own hike. Don't be that guy that just because it doesn't happen to you doesn't mean it's not going to affect the people that come after you. Don't be that guy that poops in the middle or right off the trail and leaves your toilet paper, Charmin flowers visible for everyone else to see. Don't be that guy that leaves trash and that affects wildlife to make them become acclimated to really potentially put another hiker in danger, or that wildlife at risk of being euthanized. So I would say just don't be that guy.
Or gal, by the way.
Or gal, or gender nonconforming. So whatever you want to say, just don't be the person that is hiking for selfish reasons. Understand that it's a bigger experience than just the individual's hike out there.
That's great. I think that don't be that guy is something we should all think about then every single time. And if there are people out on the trail this year, I hope somebody one day says to somebody, don't be that guy. I heard Chloe say that on Mighty Blue Show. All right. But thanks so much for coming on talking to us. I will put a link in the show notes to something. Hopefully you will send me something, and we'll make sure that people understand the principles and make sure that they realize that somebody who knows what she's talking about has just told them. All right. So thanks very much, Chloe.
Thank you, Steve.
Cheers. Bye. Don't be that guy. And there's one thing you can remember about Leave No Trace. Why not? Don't be that guy. I really hope that somebody somewhere on trail this year hears, don't be that guy. Please let me know if you hear it. Thanks to Chloe for articulating everything so clearly. Speaking with her, I realised that she had so much more to tell us, so I've arranged Chloe to come back on the show soon to share her own hiking journey as a future guest. Now, just before we get to the last chapter of Paul Stutzman's book, I wanted to share this with you. One of our listeners, Frances Youngblood, wrote to me attaching a flyer for an event that one of her, and I'm quoting, backpacking friends is having for foster children to be able to experience the outdoors and learning about that outdoors. I thought it was a terrific idea. These are youngsters in foster care aged between 14 and 20, and I'm pretty sure that none of them will have had the opportunity to go out and just hike in the woods. There are going to be all sorts of courses for these young people. It looks like a really wonderful event. And apparently the event is taking place on Saturday the 25th of April at Bennett Springs State Park in Lebanon, Missouri. What Francis wanted was a couple of signed books from me to kind of inspire the kids, and of course I've sent those out. Mind you, whether or not they'll be inspired by some of my past, I couldn't possibly tell you. What I'm asking you for are any gently used books you may have that will similarly be given to these young people to inspire them. I'm sure they won't be offended if you decide instead to buy a new copy of your favourite book to send them. You know how you came to the trail. It was often through the stories of others. I'll also be reaching out to writers I've met over the years to see if they can also send in signed copies of their books. You can send them to Tracy, Tracey, Tracy Sheets, Sheets, and her address is P.O. Box 751, Ozark, Missouri 65721. This is a really wonderful attempt to help bring the trail to young people who may never have had that opportunity. The address is in the show notes, and I really thank you for listening. Finally today, it's the conclusion and the epilogue of Paul Stutzman's Hiking Through. Reading this over the past several months has really brought it all back to me. Both Paul's journey, it was the book that I read after Bryce's Walk in the Woods, and really the one that got me on the path that I took to hiking the trail, first in 2014 and then again last year. Knowing some of these places so intimately has been great for me to be able to revisit them through this book. I hope that you've enjoyed it too. I'll see you next week. Chapter 24. The Conclusion. Just past the camp store, the trail continues into the woods. We stopped at an information board close to the path and reserved our shelter for that night. Baxter State Park, where Katahdin reigns, was donated to the people of Maine by Percival P. Baxter, who wished the land to remain forever wild. The park is very restricted, with a limited number of shelters, and spots in those few shelters are usually booked far in advance. Since thru-hikers cannot know when they will arrive at the park, several shelters near the Katahdin Stream campground are reserved for thru-hikers only. As hikers arrive at the information board at the Abel Bridge, they reserve a spot in one of these shelters 10 miles ahead on the trail. A maximum number of 12 campers each night are permitted one-night stays in this area called the Birches. From there, hikers have less than 6 miles to the summit of Mount Katahdin. Ina was driving to Maine from Ohio to climb Katahdin with me. She would not be permitted to take one of the thru-hiker spots at the Birches, but I hope to find a shelter in the Katahdin Stream campground for her. Fargo, Einstein, Franklin and I hiked together at a leisurely pace since we had only 10 miles to hike that day. This stretch included the last 2 river fords of my trek. The unceasing rains had made these river crossings dangerous, and a sign informed hikers that a new Blue Blaze trail had recently been opened to bypass the river crossings. 4 hikers approached that bypass, but only 3 took it. One stubborn purist chose instead to risk his life and his entire hike. I rock-hopped for the first river crossing and remained dry. Only one more ford and it's done. That's what I thought, but it wasn't that simple. My heart sank as I approached the last crossing. The current was swift and a ford seemed impossible. A log stretched between 2 large rocks, bridging the narrowest part of the stream. But the water churned through here with a roar, and the log was less than 6 inches in diameter. Could I walk across that? I carefully put one foot on it, then the other. The rock quivered beneath me as I took a step, and I retreated back to the rock to evaluate the situation. Are you willing to die to remain a purist? I'd asked myself the question back in Maryland during a storm, and the answer then had been yes. I walked upstream, searching for an easier crossing. No luck. I must either cross at this place or give up my purist hike and take the safe, blue-blazed bypass. My 2 goals of finishing this hike and remaining a purist were within reach, and I did not want to give up either one. I got here by stubbornness and persistence, and I will get across this river. Back in the woods, I found a small but sturdy log and dragged it to the river. I positioned it beside the log already spanning the rushing water, one end on the rock on which I stood, the other end in the water halfway across the river. I now had a V-shaped log bridge. Would it work? Hurling my hiking poles to the other bank of the river, I was committed. With hands on the original bridge and feet on the log I had added, I inched across the water, arching myself over the rushing current. Halfway across, I had stretched my body as far as possible and knew I would have to jump the remaining distance. I launched toward the other side of the river. My arms found the rock and I pulled myself up onto it. I wanted to shout in victory. I knew it was foolish and dangerous, but I'd done it. Yes, I was still a purist hiker. I grabbed my poles and went in pursuit of my friends. Every through hiker planning to summit Mount Katahdin is required to sign in at the campground office. Each hiker is assigned a number, thereby giving an accurate count of through hikers finishing the trail. On Springer Mountain, I signed in as hiker 391. At Harper's Ferry, I had moved to number 191, having passed 200 of my fellow hikers somewhere along the way. I'd soon find out how many others I had passed on the second half of my hike. At the ranger station, I asked about a possible shelter for Ina. Unfortunately, all the 15 shelters at the Katahdin Stream campground were full. While I was talking to the ranger, I heard a commotion brewing outside and a familiar voice came through the screen door. "Are you Fargo? Is Apostle in there?" Ina was coming up the lawn toward us. She'd heard enough about my buddy Fargo to recognize him. I ran out and greeted my friend and introduced her to Fargo, Einstein and Franklin. "Come to the office, Ina, while I sign up for the hike tomorrow. And we have a problem. I don't know where you'll stay tonight. I wasn't able to get a shelter for you." "Oh, that's not a problem," she said. I stopped at the entrance to the park and booked the last shelter they had. Ina's arrival had been perfectly timed. Someone had just cancelled a reservation and she snatched the spot. I signed in for my climb up the mountain. I would be hiker 91 to finish the trail this season. I had passed another 100 hikers. How was it that number 91 followed me all along the trail? God's promise of protection for my hike came from Mary's beloved Psalm 91, read on the very day I started walking. All coincidence? Perhaps. Or maybe it was yet another reminder from God that all was well and in His hands. At the shelter, I prepared my pack for an early morning departure. Outside, the rain poured down, much like every other day for the last month. The forecast for the next day, though, predicted sunshine. The first rays of sunlight to hit America each morning touched Mount Katahdin. I wanted to get an early start to witness the union of morning light and mountain peak. Someday never comes, or so the saying goes. Endless waiting for someday can be frustrating, but the somedays of dreams can actually come to pass. Set goals and hike confidently toward them, one step at a time, and you will fill your life with many realized somedays. August the 13th, 2008 was my someday. Even as recently as the last day of March, less than 5 months ago, when I walked the first mile of the Appalachian Trail, this someday seemed impossible. But now it had arrived. Someday was today. At 5 a.m., Ina and I left the final 5.2 miles of my through hike, the climb up the mighty Mount Katahdin. The storm clouds had passed and stars sparkled in the night sky. Those stars faded and faint morning light grew as we made our way up the mountain. We crossed Katahdin Stream over a footbridge. A waterfall roared nearby. For several miles the trail was much like Mahoosuc Notch, except those house-sized boulders were vertical. We slowly pulled ourselves upward with the assistance of rebar rods jutting from the rocks. On one precarious slope, a rope dangled to assist hikers up the slick surface. I had advised Ina to get in shape for this hike, but she had not understood how strenuous this climb would be. Einstein passed us, then Fargo and Franklin. "We'll wait for you up there," they promised. Ina apologised for slowing me down and encouraged me to keep pace with my friends. "This is the hardest thing I've ever done," she admitted. I didn't confess to her that even after climbing 299 other mountains, I also found the greatest mountain extremely difficult. We climbed above tree level, and the sun shone on the panorama of Maine's beauty rolled out below us. Green mountain ranges and hundreds of ponds and lakes. We looked down on soft, fluffy clouds that sometimes drifted between us and the views. At last, we reached the tableland, a level plateau. The trail threaded its way between slabs of broken rocks and past Thoreau Spring, named for Henry David Thoreau, who explored Mount Katahdin in 1846 and wrote a book called The Maine Woods. Thoreau Spring was exactly 1 mile from that sign at the summit. Occasionally, we heard a shout of exhilaration from the mountaintop as another hiker realized his dream. I could see the famous sign in the distance. It jutted upward from the rocks, marking the end of my hike. Then a cloud descended and enshrouded both the sign and a group of hikers already assembled there. I had only a few hundred feet to go. Back in Damascus, Virginia, I'd met Pathfinder, who told the story of his own hike after his wife's death. I got within 10 feet of the sign and couldn't finish. I broke down and cried, he told me. In Damascus, his statement had puzzled me. I just wanted to finish my hike and go home. Now I stood in sight of that sign, and I understood what had happened to Pathfinder. I understood because I felt it myself. Our lives had both experienced brutal endings. We found peace and healing here, and the trail became reality and family. Now this too was about to end. We stood at the brink of another goodbye. The very thing that I had so wanted to finish was now done, and I did not want it to end. Fargo, Franklin and Einstein had finished and stood off to one side, waiting for me. A group of day hikers had gathered around the sign. I hung back, waiting. I had earned the right to have that sign to myself, and I waited for the other hikers to move away. Franklin noticed and understood. "Guys," he said, addressing the day hikers, "that hiker over there has walked close to 2,200 miles from Georgia to finish here. Let's let him have the sign to himself for a few minutes." The other hikers stepped aside, making way for me, applauding as I approached. I dropped my backpack and laid my poles across it, then grabbed the sign and sobbed. I fell to my knees, still holding the base of the sign, tears falling, and thanked God for safety and healing. After a few moments, I regained enough composure to pull out a Hershey bar and a Coke. I celebrated the only way a thru hiker knows to celebrate, with calories. My trail friends and I took a group photo at the sign. And just like that, it was over. Epilogue. One by one, each leaving in his own time, we drifted away from that sign on the mountaintop and slowly made our way back down Katahdin. I was reminded of high school graduation when I walked out of that school and thought, it's over. Now what do I do? Once again, I had no job and no idea what to do. In my prayer at the sign, I had also asked God for wisdom as I sought new beginnings. I wondered if I'd be able to put into practice all that I'd learned in the wilderness. Back at Katahdin Stream Campground, I found myself behind the wheel of a car for the first time in many months. Franklin and Einstein had already left, but as I passed a small pavilion, I noticed Fargo sitting there, waiting for his ride. I stopped the car and we exchanged addresses and said goodbye. As I climbed back into the car, Ina said, Fargo had tears running down his cheeks when he walked away. There were two of us with tears in our eyes. I got back out of the car and called my friend's name. He turned around and I said, "Hey Fargo, give me a hug." With tears streaming down both our faces, we embraced. We were just two average men who had shared life on a difficult 2176-mile hike from Georgia to Maine. We'd met and become like brothers. We were family. As the car bounced down the rutted dirt road leading out of Baxter State Park, I was caught in a swirl of emotion. What had kept me working so hard had now ended. Back in March, I'd driven the dirt road up Springer Mountain, dodging potholes on my way to the unknown. That unknown became the rhythm of waking up early, hiking long miles, struggling over mountains, always striving toward my goal. Now here I was again on another rutted road, leading into another unknown. I was unemployed. Katahdin was behind me. I needed new goals. Several hours later, I was speeding down the Massachusetts Turnpike when I spotted the overpass carrying the Appalachian Trail over the highway. I'd crossed that overpass and watched the traffic, thinking ahead to the day when I'd be in one of those cars, finally heading home. Now I looked to the walkway and thought back to my days on the trail. That narrow pathway had been my path to freedom. It had taught me and changed me. God had honoured his promise to be with me, and now I needed to honour my promise and give folks the message he had asked me to deliver. Back in Holmes County, my first stop was at the hillside cemetery where Mary was buried. With tears running down my face, I knelt in front of her memorial stone. I did it, Mary. I thru-hiked the Appalachian Trail. It was so much harder than I ever imagined, but I did it. I told Mary how much she had meant to me and how much our family missed her. My children had been without both a mother and a father these past 5 months. Mary, I'll tell you all about my hike when we meet again. Now I'm going home to see our new grandson. A number of people had followed my hike, reading my entries on the Trail Journal's website. I soon received invitations to speak about my adventure. The first meeting was at a local restaurant with a group of area seniors. Following my presentation, a lady sitting behind me tapped me on the shoulder and asked if I knew the gentleman beside her. He was stooped with age, with 2 canes lying across his lap. He looked familiar, but I couldn't put a name to the face. My jaw dropped when the lady told me he was a retired evangelist from Nebraska. He was the same man who had scared me half to death many years ago with rapping knuckles and shouting about Jesus' imminent return. I reached out and took his feeble hands in mine and examined his knuckles. To his bewilderment, I replied, I'm checking your knuckles for calluses. Do you have any idea how badly you scared me that night so many years ago? I smile even now, realizing the incredibility of our meeting. God sure does move in mysterious ways. God was reminding me that the message he gave me is real, and I needed to get to work and get it written for other folks. My hike had to be about more than just walking 2,000 miles. When I decided to do the hike, I needed a greater purpose for quitting my job and changing my life so drastically. One of my goals was to remind men to appreciate what they have today. Don't take your family and your wife for granted. It really is true. We never realise what we have until we no longer have it. How it would change our lives if we could fully see what we see in our families and marriages, be grateful for what we have, and make gratitude part of our daily living. Using my story on the trail as a vehicle, I also wanted to write a book that shows readers that the Christian life doesn't have to be boring. To my Christian friends, if people observe your daily life, would they say, I want what he has? We Christians should be the happiest folks in the world with what we know about life in the hereafter. Why are we often seen as the most downtrodden, dismal and judgmental people around? It's no wonder the world doesn't want what we offer. Maybe we need to remind ourselves of what we really do have. When I started this hike, I never imagined how difficult it would be. Had I known, I would never have attempted it. The trail is much like our lives. We never know what difficulties we'll encounter on this earthly pilgrimage. What we are assured of, however, is a finish line. That does sound rather strange, doesn't it? The biggest event of our lives will be the finish line when we end life's journey. Yet we don't like to think about the end. We don't want to be reminded that we will die because we often are afraid of what lies beyond death. Fear of that great unknown prompts us to try to ignore the matter. Remember the free meal in a log home in Virginia? The owner spoke about salvation and offered us books if we wanted to read more. That night he handed me a small piece of paper with a short message. That message spoke to my spirit, and I want to share it with you. Here's my paraphrase of that message. Supposing that we've travelled all these miles together, and I've never told you about God and the reality of a future judgment. If we meet someday at that final judgment, I don't want you to say to me, you knew about this and you didn't tell me. Here's what the Apostle Paul, the real one, says about the importance of this choice. He summed it up clearly in Romans, a letter he wrote to the church in Rome. These may be the most important words you'll ever read. You can take this message and never open it and figuratively hang it from a nail on a board fence, just as Motormouth did with his spiritual book that night in Virginia. Or you can hang your eternal existence on these words if you choose. For some reason, God wants to have a relationship with us. I don't pretend to know why, but I suspect it has something to do with love. However, there's a problem between God and us. The problem is sin. God just absolutely cannot tolerate sin. In Romans 3:23, the Apostle Paul tells us that everyone has sinned. Romans 6:23 says the price we pay for a life of sin is death. So there you have it. Everyone has sinned, and the punishment for sin is death. But our friend the Apostle also has some good news for us. Romans 5:8 says that God demonstrated how much he loved us by allowing his son Jesus to die for us on the cross. That death on the cross paid the price for our sins. The defining question is this: what must we do to be saved from death? Once again, the real Apostle Paul gives us the answer. Romans 10:9 says that if we speak with our mouths that Jesus is Lord, and we believe that God raised Jesus from the dead after he was crucified, then we'll be saved. Can't be that easy, you might be thinking. I thought I had to jump through all kinds of hoops and follow all kinds of rituals to be assured of eternal life. My friend, it is indeed that simple. Paul says in Romans 10:13 that everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. You see, there truly are two pathways in this life. One is the path to destruction and everlasting death. The other is the path that leads to an eternal life with God in a place called heaven. These paths run somewhat parallel to each other in our earthly life. However, there is the problem of crossing from one path to the other. Don't look back. You cannot change what is behind you. To change your path and change your life, you'll need a bridge. You're at that bridge now. The cross of Jesus can take you from the path of death to the path of life. The cross, that great symbol of Christianity, beckons you to give up whatever is keeping you on the wrong path. cross the bridge and find a peace you've never imagined and a journey with God that is indescribable. Nailed to a cross, Jesus paid a great price for your life. Choose wisely, my friend. You can mock that cross if you wish, or you can say, God forgive me. Words do have meaning. It's time to finish this adventure. What a journey it's been. From the highest mountain to the lowest valley on the Appalachian Trail, my summer of 2008 is a story of peace and healing. I hiked with a partner, God, who is the originator of love. God's love will comfort you too through valleys of despair and will lead you to your own mountaintop of peace and freedom.